Hey, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Syracuse Sports. My name is Brent Axe. It's great to have you here, and we hope that you are subscribing to the pod so when a new episode of Syracuse Sports pops up, you won't miss a thing. Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, please subscribe and follow so you can follow along with the latest here on Syracuse Sports. Kind of a special episode today as Mike Waters and I got together and just shared some memories. This is one of those no notes kind of podcasts where you just get together and reflect. As unfortunately, the news this week that Lawrence Moten passed away at the age of 53, the all-time leading scorer in Syracuse basketball history, averaged 19.3 points per game over a 4-year career. So many basketball accolades, but one of the great central figures of Syracuse basketball really ever. Lawrence was a constant presence in the central New York community at the Dome after his playing days, one of the nicest people I've ever encountered around the program. A smooth man, a smooth basketball player. Just every time he talked to Lawrence, it was positive vibes. And that's the word I keep coming back to. He was just so smooth as a person, as a player, and everything in between. So Mike and I wanted to get together and just share some memories and some stories about Lawrence Moten. So we hope you enjoy that, as a lot of people are reflecting this week on his great life, and a life just taken too soon at the age of 53. But he left behind a lifetime of memories for Syracuse basketball fans, for sure. And before we get into Mike and I here, certainly our Syracuse Sports Insiders have been reflecting this week with the news of Lawrence Moten's passing. And being a Syracuse Sports Insider, just a reminder, is a way to connect with me directly via text message. It's just $3.99 a month to be a Syracuse Sports Insider, but you can try it free for 2 weeks to be a part of our growing community of some of the more passionate Syracuse fans out there. And Frank says this: I most remember how he made everything look easy, so smooth. There's that word again, right? Effortless. So bummed to hear the news. Danny P says the socks. Lawrence Moten used to jack those socks knee high, man. Just one of those things that immediately comes to mind when you think of him. The stroke, every time. Legend. Closed the door on the 4-year star player. Instead of one of, I'd say my all-time favorite player. Every memory brings a smile. Richard B. says, the nickname, Poetry and Moten, for his smooth, flowing, graceful athleticism. Josh says, the socks, kind of a low-key Syracuse fashion icon. I pulled them up and even shaved a small bald spot on my head one summer when I played hoops with my buddies, and kind of a tribute to Lawrence Moten. So certainly the Syracuse basketball community and those that knew and loved Lawrence Moten are, it's a tough week. It's a tough week, but man, he is a person that every time you think of him, how could he not make you smile? How could those memories not make you smile, be it on the basketball court? Or it feels like, Mike says this in the pod, it feels like everybody has a picture with Lawrence Moten, or knows Lawrence Moten, or has a Lawrence Moten story, right? Because we mentioned he's just such a central part of the community, not just a former basketball player. I think that's the best way that we can honor the memory of Lawrence Moten, but certainly tell some stories of his accolades on the court, because it's an amazing career. And I think he has set some records that will not be broken, and has a special place in the history of Syracuse basketball. So without further ado, no music today. I thought we'd just keep it to a remembrance of Lawrence Moten and have a conversation with Mike. But please, as you know, here on Syracuse Sports, we feature your original independent music here. We would love to do that for you. All the information is in the show notes on how you can get in touch with me to have your music featured here on Syracuse Sports. We're going to skip that today and just keep it to the conversation with Mike and I. And let's take a listen as Mike Waters and I reflect on the great life of Lawrence Moten. Mike Waters is here as we remember the great Lawrence Moten. And boy, the outpouring in the past couple of days, Mike, since this has happened, has, as you can imagine, has been overwhelming. I mean, Lawrence was just one of the most popular figures around Syracuse basketball. And that's something that really stands out to me is, Mike, there are guys that you see come back, right? We've been doing this long enough that you start to see some faces that love to be around the program, no matter how long they've been gone from the program. And Lawrence was somebody who was in the central New York community for so long. But you know what, Mike? I never got tired of seeing Lawrence Moten, right? Like every time I'd see Lawrence Moten, I'd be like, that's Lawrence Moten, because I feel like I come from a place where, just to share my experience of it, and I certainly want to get your experience and kind of what you're feeling these days with the news. But I was in high school playing lacrosse while Lawrence Moten was at Syracuse.
Okay.
And there's two things that really stand out to me. I used to jack up my socks playing lacrosse. And a lot of people were like, where is that? Because I started at West Genesee, and you live in the West Genesee district, they jack up their socks. And they're like, so that's why you did it. And I eventually transferred to Bishop Ludden to play lacrosse. I'm like, no, I do that because Lawrence Moten does it.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was so cool. And I'd be the only one on the field with my socks jacked up, and inevitably somebody would always ask me, like, why do you do that? I'm like, because Lawrence Moten does it. And I just loved it, right? It was different. It was cool, right? And I was thinking about this a lot in the last day or so, Mike. So I grew up here in Syracuse, and Lawrence Moten was the last Syracuse athlete I ever rooted for, because I got into college in the fall of '96 and like immediately got into the journalism game. I started doing radio, and like you kind of make that transition. Moten was like the last guy I was a fan of. So I think that's why every time I would see him in the Dome, I would still have that same feeling. Right? It's not, oh, there's a former Syracuse player. That's Lawrence Moten, man. So he just had that effect on
high school. Brent was still a fan.
Yes.
At that time. And so that's why Lawrence was your guy.
Absolutely. And just became a fan of the person, right? Like Lawrence was just so cool. He was a smooth player, but he was a smooth guy too. Like he was just always like, just so level, cool, smooth, positive. Like it's impossible to talk to him and not walk away just feeling great.
Yeah, he was a really a good-hearted soul, just so laid back, so humble, and approachable. He would be at the Carrier Dome, JMA Wireless Dome, whatever it was at the time, whenever he was at the Dome.
You get permission to say Carrier Dome with him because
yes, exactly.
That's what you think.
Yeah,
exactly.
But he would walk through, he would come to games, because he had moved back to the Syracuse area and he was working around here. But it's not like he had an entourage. It wasn't like he needed somebody pushing the crowd back as he walked to his seat and said, no, he was just there and making his way through the fans. And if someone wanted to stop and say hi or get a photo, he was like approachable and happy to talk to people. And I mean, if you looked on social media at all over the last 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever it is now, it seems like everybody in Syracuse must have had their picture taken with Lawrence Moten. Everybody's
that's right.
Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, everybody's got a picture of themselves with Lawrence or a note from Lawrence, a signature. But that's just, that's the way Lawrence was. He was so approachable. He embraced Syracuse and the community here. And it's almost like, did he not know he was a superstar? I don't know. It's like the all-time leading scorer in school history, just meandering through the crowd, and self-deprecating, like I said, humble. He was one of my all-time favorites of the last 30 some odd years that I've covered Syracuse basketball. He was just so very likable and, just really, really saddened at his passing.
Mike, you told a great story on your podcast that I was hoping you could reiterate here. It didn't take long for Lawrence to get into the starting lineup. So he comes in as this unheralded recruit. This was not somebody coming in like Carmelo Anthony or Donnie Freeman or not a lot of stars. Like, who's this kid from Archbishop Carroll in Washington, D.C. coming into this class in the early 90s? And he gets into the starting lineup, and he had a really fun story about that he told on your podcast about having to find, hey, kids, there used to be these things called payphones, and they weren't free. That's why it said pay phones. Not that your cell phone is free, but like you literally had to put a quarter in the thing to get it to work. And he told a pretty fun story about that.
Yeah, it was the third game of his freshman season. So the 1991-92 season, he's a freshman. And he comes off the bench for the first two games at home that year and plays well. But I think Adrian Autry, starting guard, might have had a turned ankle.
That's right.
Or something. He had a gimpy ankle. And I actually remember one time telling the story, and Adrian was arguing, saying, no, there's no way that I would have let an ankle keep me from starting. And I'm like, I got the box score right here. Adrian did play that night, but Jim decided to bring him off the bench against Florida State. This is a really good Florida State team. Doug Edwards, Bob Sura, Sam Cassell, and they're playing them at the Omni in Atlanta. And Lawrence didn't know he was going to start until really close to game time, and they do the lineups on the chalkboard. And when he sees his name up there, it's like he had to let his mom know. And he's like, you didn't have a cell phone to reach for back in those days. So he's like searching the Omni for a payphone in order to call his mom, which is so Lawrence. And if you ever talk to Lawrence too, he's always invoking his mom, Lorraine Burgess. She's passed away. But if they had a bad game or if something didn't happen good in the game, he would always say, well, like Mama always said, things happen for a reason. If somebody was hurt, things happen for a reason. If they, whatever. He was always talking about his mom. So the fact that he had to call his mom was just so Lawrence, that she would be the first person that he knew he had to get in touch with. So yeah, I think it was early December at the old Omni in Atlanta was Lawrence Moten's first college start. And I want to say he went out and put like 19 points up on Florida State. And with Dave Johnson also had a great game, and they beat Florida State that night, beat them by like 15, 16 points.
He had
never
played
came out of the starting lineup again.
And his mom said, don't give it back. And
Right.
He never came out of the starting lineup again. And we have seen, a lot of these are things we knew. We knew he was the all-time leading scorer, but you start kind of getting into different levels of stats and numbers and trends when you start looking back at some games. He, in his first game, Mike, comes off the bench, and Cornell actually gave Syracuse a run that night. It was their first game of the season, and had Lawrence not come off the bench, I think he dropped 14 points in that game.
That sounds right.
They might not have won that game. So
and I think it was
right from the beginning,
in like 17 minutes.
It was quick. It was quick. And then he gets in the starting lineup and just like you said, never gave up and went from there. And he sets the freshman scoring record, which Pearl had held for about 8 years. And then, as Jim Boeheim said, every night you just look in the box score, you're like, man, he had 22. Because he was just so unassuming as a player, Mike. And I don't think I've ever seen a player like this since. But Lawrence, I brought it up how smooth of a person he is. That's what his game was like.
Yes.
Mike, he slowed the game down. The way he played basketball was just so, he glided out there. He was smooth. I keep coming back to smooth because that's the word I think of. And if you watch it from a certain perspective, you're like, why is that guy dogging it out there? But that's not what it was. He just was so smooth in how he played. I believe he's even talked about that in the past. Like, people thought I wasn't playing hard. It's like, no, that's just how he did it. But man, I don't think I've ever seen a guy like that since, that he just felt like he was in slow motion while everybody else was going 100 miles per hour out there.
Yeah, he played with an effortless style that kind of lulled you into thinking that, is he running as hard as he can? It's like, it's almost like he was a duck, all the paddling was done underwater where you couldn't see it, but on the surface, it's just calm as anything and smooth, like you said, smooth like silk. And he would glide on the court and just, he long and, part of it, I think he played with like an innate instinct for the game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've ever seen anybody better at moving without the basketball. A lot of his points didn't come in one-on-one moves where he had the ball for 15 seconds while he broke down a defender. He was moving around. He must have had more weak side tip-ins for a 6'4", 6'5" guy. And, the little reverse layups, the little flip ups. I talked with somebody yesterday. I can't remember. I talked to so many people in the past 24 hours, but him and Stevie Thompson both had this ability to go in amongst the trees near the basket and be able to use the rim to keep the center from blocking their shot. He'd go up against the 7-footer and go up on the other side of the rim and just so smooth, just gliding along. The baseline, that was his lane, man. He could go on the baseline and get up under the basket and score against anybody. I remember too, it was, the defensive part of his game. It related to his football days as a defensive back. He was all Met in Washington, D.C. 2 years running for football. And, I think he was like the defensive player of the year as voted by the Washington Post as a senior. But, that type of defensive back or safety who just seems to glide across the field and knows exactly where to be to get the interception when the ball's coming. That's Lawrence Moten, both on the football field and the basketball court.
If you're the all-time leading scorer, and he held that mark forever in the Big East, still holds that mark at Syracuse, right?
30 years later.
30 years later, which think about the evolution, and this is the next point I wanted to make, Mike. If you're piling up that many points, well, boy, he must have just been burying threes left and right. Kind of, right? He had 197 career three-pointers. This is not, and think about it, Jerry McNamara had 400. He's not the all-time leading scorer. So think about how Lawrence Moten was scoring. Sure, he'd hit some threes, but this was not a guy that lived on the three-point line.
How many buckets did he have to make to
all
make
those
up for
buckets?
The 200 extra threes that Jerry got.
Exactly. At 6'5", getting under the basket, making those shots. And that's the most incredible thing to me is how he just every night you look in that box score and he's piling up the points, but not exactly doing it from the three-point line. Mike, what do you remember about I wrote a story I hope people could check out on syracuse.com, and I had to leave some out, trust me, but I picked 13 moments that stand out, great games that he had and scoring records and things, and a few that I totally forgot about. I was like, oh my God, he did that, right? But in 1995, when he is pursuing the scoring record, now think about how that would go now. Right, with social media and we'd be tracking that. There'd be countdown clocks and all sorts of things, and how much pressure that would put on a guy today if he was chasing down that record. How aware were people in 95? Like, how did we cover that? I wasn't working for syracuse.com at the time. As I said, I was just getting out of high school into college. How did we cover it from what you remember? Let me jog some spider webs in your brain a little bit here about this guy's getting close to setting the scoring record. Was it a big deal or it just kind of happened one day? Like, what do you remember about that whole pursuit of eventually taking down Terry DeHare as the all-time leading scorer in Big East history?
It was a big deal. It was interesting because, the Big East itself was only 15 years old. So you're breaking a record that, Terry DeHare had only set just a couple years earlier. Right. So it's almost like the conference was building its history. And especially when you talk about career records, it wasn't like he was breaking Patrick Ewing's block shot record that maybe had stood for 10 years or so. So it's a new record. So you really don't know, is he breaking DiMaggio's streak here or what are we talking about? Mm-hmm. Right. But it was getting covered at the old Herald Journal, because back then we had the two newspapers.
That's right.
And, I was at the Post-Standard, so I actually, I had to tip my cap to the competition when they came up with this brilliant idea. They did a tracker, and they used his socks, the signature socks that you used. And one sock was the record, and the other sock was going up each game as Lawrence scored his points.
I love that.
Yeah, it was a really cool idea. So yeah, that they was getting tracked. Now, there was no social media, like you said. Maybe there was no pressure. Also, it seemed like there was going to be plenty of time that year for him to break the record. It was going to take something crazy, like missing a few games due to injury or something to prevent him from getting the mark. And if I recall, I think unfortunately he got it on the road. Did he break it at Villanova? You just did your list. Was it?
It was Seton Hall. East Rutherford.
At Seton Hall.
At Seton Hall.
At Terry DeHare's.
In Terry DeHare's. Okay. Yeah. On his court. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, he went into the Devil's Den there and got the record. And I remember they had a ceremony before the next home game for him, where they, for the dome crowd got to acknowledge him breaking the record. But yeah, it was on the road. So that, it was a little bit of a muted acknowledgement celebration there of breaking an otherwise, pretty significant record. And then at the time, nobody would have even imagined that it was going to then last 25 years. Because like I said, this is a new conference. This record's kind of been set and reset and, early on in the conference's.
And think of all the talent that's coming in and the guys that were staying 3-4 years. These were not the one and dones of today.
Well, even like a year later, John Wallace is going to be, at Syracuse for 4 years.
Right.
And Jerry McNamara is a 4-year guy. Hakeem Warwick is a 4-year guy. Preston Shumpert's a 4-year guy. That's just Syracuse dudes. What about, guys at the Connecticut guys, the Ray Allens and all these other guys that are going to come through. And that nobody can do it until Marcus Howard at Marquette in 2020. And I tell you what, it says something else about Lawrence, that he went to Marquette for the game where Marcus Howard was going to break the record. The Big East reached out to him through me. Actually, they tried to track him down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Little piece of history there.
And he was like, when I told him what they wanted to try to do, he was on board immediately. Absolutely. You know how some guys, when they don't want their records broken, like the Miami Dolphins are always rooting against the last team to get to sustain a loss so they can pop their champagne corks and stuff like that. That was not Lawrence. After 25 years, it's not like he felt like that record was, going to be his forever, or he had some proprietary interest in it or something. He wanted to go to Marquette and be there and congratulate, Marcus Howard and be part of the ceremony, a passing of the torch, if you will. That tells you a lot about the kind of guy Lawrence Moten is.
I hope I'm wrong about this, Mike, and that's such a great story to tell about Lawrence. Like, yes, I want to be there. I want to be a part of this. I want to pass the baton. I remember hearing some interviews with him, like, finally somebody caught up to me. Like, yes, here, please take it. You've earned it.
Maybe he was okay with it because he knew he still had the Syracuse record.
See, and that's what I want to bring up here. I hope I'm wrong about this, but dare I say, I think that might be Cy Young. I think that is an untouchable record. When you look at it here, so Lawrence Moten, 2,334 points. Derek Coleman is second, 2,143 points. You mentioned John Wallace, who made a run at it, 2,119 points. Jerry McNamara had 2,099. Hakeem Warwick, 2,073. And I'm just going to read off the rest of the top 10. Sherman Douglas, Stevie Thompson, Preston Shumpert, Dave Bing, Raphael Addison. So, Mike, the point is here, if you are a player on the level of what Lawrence Moten was in the early 1990s, here in the mid-2020s, you're not staying long enough to make a run at that record.
Probably not.
That makes me kind of sad because it just reminds me of reading off all those names, but particularly Moten. He was here for 4 years. You could make that connection. You could just know that you were, and Derek Coleman comes back for his senior year and just, I don't want to pine for the past year. We know how the game has evolved and changed, but he may have that record forever. Like, think of the type of player that it would take to set that record, which can be done with the three-point line and how it's utilized now, but them being willing to stay at college for 4 years, which is just unheard of these days. So
stay in college and not go pro, stay at the same college now with the transfer portal.
Exactly.
You never know. I mean, we know it's not going to get broken now for at least 4 years because JJ Starling enters this season as like the leading current scorer, and he's been at Syracuse for just the 2 years. Even if you gave him his Notre Dame freshman year, he's still not going to touch Lawrence's record. Donnie Freeman, even if Donnie Freeman were to play all 4 years of college, because he missed games as a freshman due to an injury, that he can't make it. There's just no way. The numbers don't add up. I mean, Lawrence averaged, what was it for his career? 18, 19 points a game?
19.3 points per game.
For his career.
4 years.
That's not one season.
That's 4 years. It's incredible.
So it's almost impossible, mathematically impossible for like a Donnie Freeman after missing, 20, 19 games. He's not going to make it. So now, so which of the current Syracuse incoming freshmen are going to get there, right? It's like, it's almost, you have to start at 17, 18 points a game as a freshman and then do it for 3 more years after that without missing a beat, without missing games, and without going pro.
A guy that popped into mind, the type of player that could do it, and I just looked it up while we were talking about it there, was like a Joe Girard, right? A Girard who comes in, who's just premier college player, maybe can't make that leap to the G League or the pros, and you figure it'd be around for 4 years. And he was, and he's 17th on the list.
He's 17.
That's how hard it is to maintain the consistency Lawrence Moten did. There were only 3 games in his career, Mike, he was not in double figures.
That's insane.
3 out of 124 games.
I didn't know that. I had not looked that one up. That is
3.
That is a
3
hell of a
times
stat.
he didn't get the doubles. That is remarkable consistency. And weirdly, and I think it's because of the type of person he was, he's still, and I think Boeheim mentioned this too a couple times, like, you still feel like he's kind of underrated. Like, how can the all-time leading scorer be underrated or not thought of? But when you make these like all-time starting fives and everything, and you think of flashier guys and exciting players, you're like, wait a minute, Moten, man, 19 points a game, his entire career, like all-time leading scorer. Like, you can't leave him off a Mount Rushmore or a starting five or anything like that.
It is incredible. I think it says something about the history and tradition of the program that you could even consider a Mount Rushmore that doesn't include your all-time leading scorer. So yeah, I know, but you do. I mean, you think about it, you got your Dave Bings, your Carmelo Anthonys, your Pearl Washingtons, your Derek Colemans, John Wallace, Billy Owens, it just, Jerry McNamara. It just goes on and on. But Lawrence was unique. He was just so unique. Didn't play with the flair and flash of Pearl. I can remember like 5 of Hakeem Warwick's dunks. And yet it's hard for me to remember like one single basket Lawrence scored.
Right.
And he must have had about 1,000 of them.
He did. And when I was writing that story, Mike, going through the memories, and I'm sure a few will kind of jog loose from your brain here as we're talking about it, but he had a buzzer beater against Villanova, 61-60 game.
At the Dome.
At the Dome.
Yeah.
He had a heater in 94 in that tournament. Just went off. And Syracuse eventually lost to Missouri in the Sweet 16 of that 1994 tournament, but he was scoring. He had 2 29-point games, and I think he scored a total of like 76 points in 3 games. Mm-hmm. We mentioned just so many big games, like they beat Georgetown in the 92 Big East Championship game. He's a freshman. He leads them in scoring.
Yeah, that mattered to him, by the way.
That mattered big time.
As a Washington, D.C. kid who was Georgetown wasn't quick to start recruiting him. They were a little bit late to the party, and I think that helped Syracuse. So, yeah, that mattered to Lawrence.
He said that after that game, too. Like, I have the exact quote in my story, but it's basically like, yeah, I noticed that they didn't recruit me, and he loved, and who didn't at Syracuse at that time, but, man, he loved to stick it to Georgetown. But I think the memory that stands out the most about Lawrence, Mike, is 1995, Syracuse, Arkansas, defending national champions. Unfortunately, now here's the redemption in a way, and I'll circle back to this, but timeouts define Moten in a good and a bad way. The bad one is Arkansas, time expiring at the end of regulation. He calls a timeout they don't have. And look, that's unfortunate, and that's going to stick with him. It should not be forgotten. He had 27 points in that game, and they dueled with Scotty
Thurman
and Corliss Williamson. Yep, name's coming back to me now, right? They gave Arkansas a run. That game went to overtime. Unfortunate moment where he called a timeout they didn't have in the shadow of Chris Webber, by the way. That was only 2 years before that.
Yeah, that's what really stung. Yeah.
It shouldn't be forgotten, though. Not only what he did in that game, but, Mike, in 1993, you remember this is one of the most famous games in Syracuse history. Mike Hopkins to Conrad McRae in the shadow of Christian Laettner, right? The full court play. Same court, exactly.
Yeah.
That play does not happen unless Lawrence Moten calls a timeout.
Yeah.
He had the wherewithal to call a timeout because Kerry Kittles, there's a name for you.
Yep.
hit what they thought was the game-winning shot, but it was discovered. Oh, wait a minute. Syracuse called a timeout. So, yeah, Moten's remember for that timeout he didn't have in 95, but he also was instrumental. He had 18 points in that game, too, of calling one of the most important timeouts in Syracuse history. So I think we got to balance the scales of history there.
Yeah, and you made a good point, too, about the Arkansas game. He scored 27 points against the Razorbacks, and that's they were a tough team, and they were targeting him. John Wallace had a heck of a game that day, too, as I recall. But I think Lawrence got those two. I know it was an overtime game, but he did not play 40 minutes. I think he was like closer to a 34 or 35-minute game that day. So he played great. The whole Syracuse team that day played. They played great to beat Southern Illinois 2 days earlier in the first round. It's really amazing. Lawrence Moten's teams went to 3 NCAA tournaments. Now, his sophomore year, they were banned from the tournament. They were serving a probation or whatever. So he only had a chance to go to 3 tournaments. And they went all 3 times, and all 3 trips to the NCAA tournament ended in overtime. You had to beat Syracuse. They did not go down easy. They lost to UMass his freshman year at a game played in Massachusetts, I believe.
I think it was in Worcester.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken.
You're
yeah.
right. Which, thank you, NCAA Tournament Committee, for sending us into
like it is today, man.
Massachusetts. Yep. Yeah, they lose to Missouri out in Los Angeles his junior year, and he had a great game in that overtime in that loss. So did Adrian Autry, especially all in the second half. And then in his last game ever is against Arkansas, and it's another overtime loss. I mean, he is a whisker away from 2 more Sweet 16s and at least another Elite 8. Can you imagine? Then we're like, oh my God.
Think about the leg. Maybe that's why he comes up a little shorter than he should in the conversation about legacies and everything. But
maybe, I don't know.
Mike, here's another thing, though.
Washington never made it past the Sweet 16.
Exactly.
So.
But you hit on an important point here. He made 3 tournaments, but they knew they weren't going to a tournament. He stuck it out despite that. Like, someone had to carry the baton forward, knowing that Syracuse was not making the tournament that year. And that freshman year, from what I recall, Mike, that was not a team people were expecting to make a deep, like at Syracuse, the standard was there. You got to make the tournament and everything. But from what I remember, that was a team that people were like, okay, like, all right, I wasn't expecting this. And
that was the year
Moton stuck
Billy
it out.
Owens had left early.
Right.
Billy leaves after his junior year, and the year before, it was like the Billy and the Beaters or whatever. It was like the team was like all Billy Owens, and then all these other guys. Now all of a sudden Billy's gone, and you're like, who's going to take over? And well, Dave Johnson turned into a star and a first round NBA pick, and then this kid, a freshman, shows up and just starts scoring points and never stops. And that was Lawrence. But yeah, so that 1992 team was a revelation that they did as well as they did in the aftermath of losing Billy.
It was great reflecting on Lawrence today. He is going to be greatly missed, and we certainly send our thoughts and prayers and all the good feelings we could possibly get out there to those in the Syracuse basketball community, his family, his friends. There's so many people that loved him so much, and we loved having the opportunity to not only cover him as a player but get to know him afterwards. And that's a loss that's going to sting for a while. And we wish everybody the best. But, he's certainly one of those people, Mike, no matter what, no matter when you think of him, how it comes up, how his name appears before you, you will smile when you think of Lawrence Moten.
Absolutely. That's a good way to put it. Gone way too soon at age 53. You wish you had one more chance to just say hi to him and see him at the Dome, Yep. He's left a mark on Syracuse basketball that'll be there forever.
Thanks again to Mike Waters for joining me, sharing some memories and stories about Lawrence Moten, a great player, an amazing person, and somebody who will be deeply, deeply missed for sure. Thank you to Mike, and thanks to our Syracuse Sports Insiders and our Syracuse Sports listeners for continuing to share your memories of Lawrence Moten as well. Just a couple reminders here on the pod, folks. On Friday, Billy Embody is going to join me. Billy covers SMU for On 3, does an amazing job covering the Mustangs as Syracuse heading down there this weekend. So we will preview that matchup between Syracuse and SMU coming up on Saturday, see if the Orange can recover after that blowout loss to Duke at the JMA Wireless Dome last weekend. And our Syracuse football postgame show presented by Krause Health, the exclusive healthcare partner for Syracuse Athletics, will be on live Saturday night after the Orange takes on SMU. We're doing live post-game shows after every Syracuse football game, and that will continue into basketball season as well. So keep it locked here, not only for the live pods, but for Syracuse Sports. And again, the best way to keep in touch and know when new episodes pop up is to subscribe and follow on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. So we'll talk to you then, but thanks for hanging with us today in this remembrance of the great Lawrence Moten. My name is Brent Axe. This is Syracuse Sports. We will talk to you next time.